introduction. To you and all of your companions in the organizing of this event, deepest thanks. This has been a wonderful morning, and I look forward to the afternoon. And it's just been wonderful to recognize what Chicago Area Peace Action can accomplish. I'm going to tell an anecdote that some of you have heard before. I know that, but some of you haven't. And somehow, it seems to me like this anecdote helps to perhaps tie together some threads in my own experience that might reflect on some of our themes for today. So, once upon a time, I was part of a group that decided that a way we could act in regard to the rising risks of the nuclear exchange between the then Soviet Union and the United States was to plant corn on top of nuclear missile silo sites. I don't know why I don't go out and do it more often, but maybe I wouldn't do corn now. But anyway, we met together for a solid year. We had retreats, we had many gatherings, and finally on an August morning we went out to the missile silo fields in Missouri. There were 150 intercontinental ballistic nuclear missiles surrounding just Kansas City and 1,000 in the Midwest. And I planted corn on top of 16, ultimately, of those nuclear missiles. But the first morning I was pretty nervous. My heart was pounding. And I thought, oh, what if I get stuck on top of that barbed wire fence? And so, plucked up my courage, got over the fence, and I was on the other side. I knew my companions were out doing the same thing at other nuclear missile silo sites. And I did my first and, well, really almost only agricultural act, and planted my 5 pellets of pink corn. And then I calmed down, I hung some banners, and the birds were chirping, the crickets were creaking. It was really a beautiful morning, and then along came a military vehicle with a machine gun mounted on top, and it sped down the road, skidded to a stop. There were gravel and pebbles, and I thought, oh, they're here for me. And they gave very clear instructions, you know, to stand up, hands in the air, step to the left. And I thought, oh, good, they've got the key. I don't have to climb the fence in front of them. And then I was handcuffed, and then 3 of them took off, maybe to see what does Chapter 2 of the manual say to do. And so I was alone with one soldier who had his gun, you know, not at my head, but aimed at me, behind me. Well, I lasted maybe, as I was handcuffed, kneeling in that field, a minute and a half in silence. And then I just started talking, and I babbled out, you know, why we did this action, and that we were concerned for children in his life, as well as children in the Soviet Union and children in the U.S. And then I asked him, do you think the corn will grow? And he said, I don't know, ma'am, but I sure hope so. So then I asked, would you like to say a prayer? Yes, ma'am. So I did the memorized St. Francis Peace Prayer, make me a channel of your peace, and concluded that, and he said, amen. And then he asked me, ma'am, would you like a drink of water? And I said, oh, yes, please. And then he said, ma'am, please tilt your head back. Well, I can still feel that water dribbling down my chin. And that young soldier, I think, took a risk. I mean, maybe the manual says keep your prisoner fed and watered, but I know, I could see he had 2 hands on the canteen that he squeezed in order to pour water down a man's throat. So what did he do with the gun? He was supposed to be guarding that nuclear missile. And so I just want to ask you this afternoon to stay with me a moment longer. With that young soldier's question, would you like a drink of water? He decided that that was more important than guarding the nuclear missile. So what if we could take his action and his question, and if we could ask the children in Yemen today, would you like a drink of water? If we could say it means a lot more to us to give the children in Yemen who are facing cholera and starvation and death. 87,500 children have already died because of starvation and thirst and disease caused by that war. What if we could say we care more about you getting a drink of water than all the weapons and all the weapon sales? Or what if we could ask the children in Flint, Michigan, would you like a drink of water and not have lead-poisoned water? And if we you could say we care more about the environmental concerns and the well-being of the children than in continuing to pour $717 billion worth of money into the Pentagon. What if we could say to the children in future generations, would you like water? Because as we saw from the wonderful panel this morning, those generations are severely, critically imperiled while we continue to allow the United States military to practice so much overconsumption of our resources that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, they're like a demonic suction cup. There is no way that we can have a rational discussion of solving the problems we face unless we tackle the militarism in a permanent warfare state that we've become, unless we tackle the militarism that has become like a religion in the United States. And when Quinn was mentioning some of the places where Voices has been, we really do believe that where you stand determines what you see. I realize that I've derived so much education and learning from people that are bearing the brunt of U.S. wars. And they extend a hand of friendship and forgiveness to those of us who are from the United States, even when the bombs are raining down on their heads. And they're not people who can escape. They don't have that blue passport that I run around with. And so I'd like to ask you to think with me a little bit about what we could learn from villagers in Yemen. And the first village I want to think about is a place called Arhab. It's a very rural, remote area of Yemen. And in 2016, the villagers had realized, you know, if we wait for the government or for some NGO to help us drill for water, we'll wait a very long time. And they managed to, over time, form a cooperative and acquire a drill and one very generous supporter. And they were drilling for water and going down, 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 because the water table was lowering all across Yemen. And it really was a matter of life and death for them to finally reach water. And lo and behold, one day, they struck water. And so the whole village turned out for a celebration. The celebration went on into the night. And when it ended, a Saudi warplane carrying a Raytheon-supplied weapon fired that weapon at the villagers. And the weapon, it was so huge and it was traveling at 8 times the speed of sound. And so when it exploded, shards from the weapon decapitated people, maimed people. And it was at pitch dark, so the next morning, villagers went out. Could they offer help? Could they find loved ones that were missing? And some of them weren't able to grab the curious kids, so there were children too. And 100 people had gathered when more warplanes came with more Raytheon manufactured weapons. And the survivors said it was as though they were pursuing people that were running away. And 31 people were killed, and many dozens were wounded and seriously wounded in the village of Arhab, where what the villagers had tried to do was find the water they needed and share it. I want to speak also about a village called Al-Real. Also, we're rural and remote. And the United States is allowed by the rules that obtain now, because of counterterrorism, to attack any person or group that they believe is part of Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula. And so Navy SEALs attacked Al-Real. And some of you might remember that Chief Petty Officer Ryan Owen, a Navy SEAL, was killed that night during that attack. But what had happened is that the Navy SEALs, who are very, very professional warriors and are trained to do night raids, and they've done them again and again, had landed in a helicopter and they went to do a night raid on the home of somebody they were assigned to attack or capture. And there was a big commotion, and what they hadn't planned on is that villagers and people from a neighboring village came running and weren't sure who was attacking their kinspeople, but a firefight broke out and the villagers disabled the Navy SEALs helicopter. So then the Navy SEALs called in air support. And it was in that process that Chief Petty Officer Ryan Owen was killed, possibly by a grenade. No one's quite sure who threw the grenade. But when the air support came, there were a group of children and their mothers, 12 children and 2 young mothers. Fahin Mohsen was 30 years old, and she was with her sister and her sister's children. And all of a sudden, a missile ripped through their tiny mud hut. And so Fahin Mohsen had the terrible decision to make. Should they stay in the tiny home and wait and see if another missile would come? Or should she try to shepherd the children out into the night and hope to seek safety? And she chose the latter. And so just as she was with her infant in her arms and her 5-year-old's hand in her hand, beginning to shepherd the children out into the night air, perhaps the heat of her body alerted sensors, because that's how sensitive they are, and a helicopter, a ship bullet, a gunship bullet hit her in the back of the head. She died instantly. Her infant suffered mercifully, only a graze on the forehead. Her 5-year-old was the witness who told what happened. In another village, well, actually several villages near the city of Sada in northern Yemen, there were children who were on their field trip. They were on the bus, and you know how kids are. Some of you have chaperoned field trips, or you can remember field trips. And they were kind of giggling and squirming and taking cell phone pictures of each other. And it was a reward because they'd studied hard at a kind of summer school. And so their teachers were in the bazaar to purchase food for a picnic that they would have. And they each had on their backs blue UNICEF backpacks, and those are so valuable because UNICEF fills the backpacks with vaccines and antibiotics and vitamins. So the kids were helping their families by having done so well and getting this reward. And so while the teachers were off the bus and some were still on the bus, they were waiting, and suddenly a Lockheed Martin manufactured missile was dropped right on the bus. Pity the emergency medical technology people who come out in those terrible, terrible scenes. They have to try to piece the bodies together and identify those whom they can. And so that day, they were able to identify 36 children, but it's estimated 44 children were killed. On that day, the surviving children helped to dig the graves for their classmates. And about 2 months ago, wearing their bespattered, bloody backpacks, those who survived returned to school. March 26th, quite recently, people in the village of Kifat were at the hospital, and it was one of the only hospitals in the area. They were congregated in the waiting room. There were hospital workers arriving to go to work, and again, a Raytheon missile was used, and the Saudis bombed the hospital, killing 6 people, 4 of them children. The United Nations has said to the Saudis, it's against the law, international law, to bomb hospitals. And a brigadier general at one point said to the United Nations, well, we'll ask our American counterparts for better advice on targeting. So I ask you to recall with me that in October of 2015, the United States had gone over a Doctors Without Borders hospital in the north of Afghanistan, in a province called Kunduz. And for an hour and a half, the United States relentlessly bombed that hospital. So I just want to tell you a story that's a bit more personal for me in that regard. I have O-negative blood, and so at the Emergency Surgical Center for Victims of War in Kabul, they're always happy to see me because my blood can be used for different types of patients' blood types. And so I had finished donating the blood along with several of my young friends from Afghanistan who said they would donate blood too. And then I asked them, are there any more patients from the Kunduz hospital? I knew that you took in 91 people who survived that bombing. And they said, oh, Allah, yes, you go visit this boy, he's so lonely. He was the last patient still there. So we got to visit Khalid Ahmed. And Khalid Ahmed was a pharmacist. He was a student pharmacist, And his mother had said to him, "Oh, my son, do not go to that hospital today. It's too dangerous. The government is fighting the Taliban." And he said to his mother, "Mom, I have to go. Last week we treated 359 people, and 50 of them were children. Who's going to replace me?" And so he went to work assuring his mother that a hospital would never be bombed or hit. He was taking the overnight sleeping shift with the chief pharmacist, and all of a sudden the two were awakened by a huge explosion, and they ran up to see that the hospital was in flames, even though it was a big compound the size of a football field, and there were other buildings like a storage building or a cafeteria that were pretty empty. The only places being bombed were the emergency room and the ICU unit. And they saw patients they had been treating burning in their own beds. It was an utter nightmare. And so they found security people, and the security people said, "Look, we don't know why this is happening." Already the Doctors Without Borders were notifying the United States and NATO and the United Nations, saying this is a hospital you're bombing. But in 15-minute intervals, this C-130 United States military transport plane, outfitted with Bofors cannons and Gatling guns, would sail off into the air and come back and bomb again. It went on for an hour and a half. And the security people had said to Khalid Ahmed, "Look, these kinds of American planes can target your cell phone, so take your cell phone apart, and then all we can tell you is run for it." So they both took their cell phones apart. The chief pharmacist ran toward the front gate. He made it, and so they said to Khalid Ahmed, "Hey man, you gotta run." And so Khalid Ahmed's heart is pounding. He ran as fast as he could. He got 1 foot outside the gate, and then he was hit with shrapnel in the back. And he could immediately realize he was losing blood profusely. He'd become paralyzed on one side, and so he went into a ditch right at the entrance gate. And in Afghan tradition, if you know that you're nearing your death, you should try, if you can, to tell your father that you're sorry for anything you ever did to hurt your father or the family. But Ahmed had disabled his own cell phone. So he manages to get the cell phone out, to put the battery back in, reaches his mother, then his father, says he's sorry, and his father managed to get from him exactly where he was. He lost consciousness, but relatives sped to that ditch inside the entrance. And he awoke in a body bag, and he said, "I'm not dead." But that was really the only way that they could transport him. They didn't have a stretcher. It must have been a torturous 5-hour drive to Kabul to get him to the Italian hospital. But they were able to save his life. So he had told this story to my young friends, and they were translating for me. But then he realized that I was from the United States. Now I think Khalid Ahmed may have had something like survivor's guilt. There were 43 people killed that day, and 13 of them were hospital staff, and 3 of them were doctors. And he was fortunate to survive, but he was, he had an internal catheter and an IV pole. He could only walk with assistance. And so he looked at me and he asked me very clearly, "Why would your people want to do this to us? Why would your people want to do this to us?" It was Save the Children that reported from Yemen that 87,500 children have already died in Yemen. And the Saudi coalition of countries attacking Yemen has regularly used United States weaponry, United States surveillance, United States intelligence, and so we are very, very complicit in that war. Now I want to tell you how Save the Children was founded. Eglantine Jebb, after World War I, realized that a blockade was causing German and Austrian children to starve, some of them to starve to death. So even though it was considered treasonous, she went out to Trafalgar Square and she had a flyer. And the flyer announced that these emaciated children, whose picture was on the flyer, were dying and that these deaths were being caused by the UK. So she was arrested and she was tried and found guilty and fined. But the judge in her case paid the fine. And that became the first contribution to Save the Children. And Eglantine Jebb is perhaps most famous for having said every war is a war against children. And so I go back to that soldier who said, "Ma'am, would you like a drink of water?" And I celebrate our collective desire here today to save the children, to share the resources, to renounce United States exceptionalism, and to always believe that we can and we must abolish war. Thank you.